Charcoal. It's one of the most beautiful mediums I've ever used. As a painter, it's the one way I actually love to draw. And what I love about charcoal is texture, beautiful brush strokes, mark making, the richness of the value you can create, and the expressive feel. As you can see here, as I'm drawing with real traditional charcoal, it's a unique medium because it's a unique tool. Look how big and chunky it is. As you draw, there's flakes of the dusty particles that fleck onto the edge of the canvas, and you can just see that even as you pick it up, your hands get immersed in the media. It's messy, it's bulky, it's chunky, it's bold. And you can use other things with it, like paintbrushes and so on. It's a very complex medium for a lot of people that come from a drawing background. So what we're going to do is do some digital Notan drawing, which is a Japanese word for basically doing a two-tone drawing, looking for the shapes of light and dark. Now, we've done this probably before. If you've ever watched any of my channel before, I love working in this way. It's because it helps you see the graphic design of the composition without any distractions. It helps you understand whether or not this is going to be a good picture without getting immersed or lost in the details that ultimately don't matter. So yeah, and I think I want to really hammer that home, is that you can't really save a picture with detail. It's really about finding an interesting design. That's what good composition does, is it finds the interest right away. As you can see here, the references I'm using are from pexels.com, and I love Rebelle in this way because I just have this big body of reference images. You can see it sitting next to my toolbar over on the left-hand side at the top. So what I do when I set up a drawing situation like this, I make a canvas that's roughly the proportion of my screen, and I zoom out just a little bit so it's not filling up everything, and I draw using the control key, like the nice, rectangular lines. This is really convenient. And then I will open up a host of references. Sometimes I'll load in 20 references, and then I just kind of pick some at random to force myself to draw things that maybe I wouldn't have selected, And I draw some of them, like you saw the first one where it's like almost the same cropping as the photo. And with this one, you can see obviously the proportion of the image is different. The ratio of the height and the width is different. So in this one, I'm cropping in a lot. What I'm trying to do with these different croppings is I'm trying to force myself to look for interesting compositions. I don't want to just rely on the composition of the photographer. As a digital artist, you would really benefit yourself if you went out and took your own reference images. That would be a great way to train your eye to find the best composition. But if you're doing what I'm doing here, I'm just trying to model how you can use stuff that's already available online. And to do that, I just go to pexels.com, search random things like sunlit landscape or sunlit still life or a boat in the harbor, things like that. And I always try to find images with real, direct, natural sunlight. I try to stay away from HDR imagery or kind of contrived studio lighting that definitely doesn't have a lot of visible light direction. And I do this work because it helps me think about the fundamentals of art, which is you're looking to design an interesting relationship between values. And with these two-tone drawings, you're looking for an interesting relationship between light and dark. And when you think about those shape relationships, charcoal is a perfect tool to do that. It's 100 times faster than drawing with a pencil, and it's 100 times more bold and dark as well. So when working with charcoal, it sort of encourages you to be a bit of a risk taker. You have to kind of go out on a limb and just lay it down. And if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. I mean, it's digital. You hit Control Z and you can undo your mark, right? But even if you don't, you can sometimes force yourself to play hardball and say, hey, I'm going to not let myself Control Z. I'm just going to deal with my mistakes. And I would recommend working that way, to put it down boldly and confidently, thinking about things in terms of their shape, not their edge. Not that you're trying to go and draw, the edge of the boat or the edge of the water or the edge of the shore, but rather you're trying to find the shape of the water But not even that, right? The shape of the shadow in the water, the shape of the highlight in the water, the shape of the shadow of the shrubbery, the shape of the mass of trees in the background. So a couple techniques here. When you accomplish your goal, maybe you do 3 or 4 of these, I always let myself do like 1 or 2 of them with a midtone. So the traditional Notan drawings are just 2-tone, black and white, but I will let myself create a couple that are 3-tone. So I find the one I like the most, and I'll go in with like a medium gray, and I kind of work in my midtones. What I love to do here is see if I like the drawing, if I like the painting. I almost think of it almost more like a painting, just with that simple tonal structure. So thinking about tonal structures, here's some portraits. These portraits are from the same website, the pexels.com. And I also have just a random image of some of the planar surfaces of the human head. So the jump here from drawing still lives and landscapes to doing these planar portraits is natural to me, because the theme here is looking for shapes of shadow and light. And that is, again, a perfect approach for charcoal. Notice how I'm using a big swath of charcoal mark. I'll use as big of a stroke as I can to render the shadow beneath the cheekbone or the shadow for the brow ridge. And I try to capture these things with one big mark, not just for the utility of getting it done quickly, but also for the practice of looking for bigger shapes. It's so hard for us to let go of control, maybe in life or certainly in our drawings, but it's important and crucial that we do. It's important that we sort of master this idea of being able to have some confidence when we lay down the stroke. And you can see that I'll work from bigger strokes to some tinier strokes. Here, I'm letting myself have, a little bit of the benefit of a smaller tool here, and it allows me to get into some of those spaces that were not possible in the beginning. But this is kind of a fun exercise again. It's just another way of doing the exact same exercise, which is looking for the shape relationships, establishing where the darks are, where the lights are. And for all of this, my recommendation would be to squint your eyes, keep it simple, and work quickly. That way you don't get thinking about it too much, And I don't mean that you shouldn't think when you work. You should. I just don't think you should overthink it. What you were doing here is not a very philosophical or conceptual thing. We are just recording value shapes, right? So it shouldn't take a whole bunch of wondering about that. We're working black and white, which is simple. We're working from an already simplified illustration, right? So it doesn't take a heck of a lot of imagination. Once I feel warmed up with that, then I'll jump into doing an actual portrait study. Again, you can see I like to start with the brow ridge, a big stroke there. A lot of times I'll take that stroke all the way across from the left eye all the way through to the right eye, and it helps kind of render that downward tilted part of the face that is between the eyebrows and the nose. And then I use big strokes to just sweep in on the underside and then the side plane of the nose. And I can amass a multitude of marks. It sometimes adds to the effect to make it look more organic, that you have multiple big strokes overlapping with these subtle values as you're establishing the big shapes. There's a subtle darkening to the cheek on the far side of the face, just on the other side of that highlight on the nose. So just make sure to tone that back cheek a little bit. I'll make sure to put all of these reference images in the forum so that you guys have a way to access the things I am, and you can work alongside me as we paint, as we draw, as we compose. This kind of thing is, again, really fun, and you can see the relationship of the 3 things we've done so far. We're keeping it simple, we're keeping it more simple, and we're keeping it even more simple. As you can see here, I'm showing you what I typically do in my head when I look at a reference. A lot of times if I have a color reference, my brain will kind of translate it to black and white. And a lot of times I'll go even further, squinting my eyes so that all I see is a kind of a unification of those shadow maps, like all those different shadows, whether it's from the darkness of the hair or the underside of the brim of the hat or the concave shapes of where the eyelids are or the underneath of the chin. I would like to see them all when I squint as just one big dark mass. And the more simple I can be with this process, the better the work is going to become. Interestingly, this is something that I had my first experience with this is in high school class when I was, I probably 16, 17 years old. And my teacher had us painting with just a cup of black and a cup of white paint. And we were working on a toned gray surface. And I thought it was the most fascinating and fun thing to do. And I looked around the class and I realized that a lot of my peers, they were struggling with it. And I wasn't struggling with it. I really liked it. And I realized that at that moment that it's sort of the way that I think was intuitive to that process. I don't like having continuous lines outlining and like encircling shapes. I want to let things kind of emerge through multiple marks. I like to let myself and the viewer find the shape through kind of the discovery of these interactions. And so as you're working on something like this, it does take a little bit of a different mindset. If you're used to drawing, a circle around or an enclosed shape around every object in your scene, you might struggle with this because you're like, well, where's the edge, and you want to go and draw that edge with a crisp line. But instead of doing that, which you have to know, when you do a crisp line outlining everything, you're basically making a coloring book for yourself. In this case, though, I'm straying very, very far from that. If you look at all the edges in this picture, I'm moving them around, I'm lightening and darkening and adjusting them. And the whole process is very organic. And the result of that is each edge that's in the picture is very interesting in isolation and especially as a whole. So working in this way, you don't have a stiff, dead sort of coloring book version of your reference. Instead, you have an interpreted, very personalized rendering of it with vibrant edges, interesting transitions, and visible brushstrokes. Charcoal is sort of a dry media version of painting. And you can see here what I did in the beginning. I worked from that very simplistic black and white Notan drawing version of the reference. And then I added in that midtone. And then I'm going here on top of it with the color. So I'm just showing you that you can reduce this down into an extreme minimalism, or you can build it back up into high levels of complexity where you're adding all the tonal nuance, all the color, all the different saturations, and you can play in and out of these different spaces as you like. And even though this is a charcoal drawing tutorial, you can think about this as like a chalk pastel. And a chalk pastel drawing is very similar to charcoal. They're very much like cousins in the realm of dry media. What you can do with chalk pastel and what you can do with charcoal are really similar. So as you can see here, we have the 3 layers. The first one is the Notan drawing. The second one adds some of that tonal complexity. And the third one is the one with the color. And we're just going to walk through them one by one here. So that was really a successful rendering there. And then here we add the complexity, which you can see I did on a separate layer. Adds, some of the fleshiness of the cheeks and so on, a little bit of detail in the eyes. And then here you can see if we had given ourselves even a little more time, we could do this. Really, really fun. So that takes us to part 4 of this drawing, which is the portrait. And all of what we've done so far is basically building on simplicity. And we're going to take that and see if we can turn it into something that isn't a nice sketchbook drawing, but something that's quite beautiful. So what we have here is me actually doing some pre-draw and some careful pre-draw. And the reason I'm doing this is because that downward facing proportion, like the downward tilt of the face, it's a different setup than what we see normally. I have an intuitive grasp of how to draw the face almost like blindfolded, it feels like, when it's just drawing a face head on. But drawing the face in this way, I want to make sure I get the proportions right, that the nose and the tilt of the eyes and all that stuff is just so. Now here I'm just showing you some of the ways that I work with and adjust some of the default charcoal brushes to make a brush that feels good for what I want for this project. Here is a really nice, rich black, little flecks of charcoal dust erupting out of the end of each stroke. It's just so much fun. Drawing in Rebelle is a very natural feeling process, and rendering in charcoal is very fulfilling. It feels very similar to what it does feel like in the real thing, you know, and I think that if you have any background in traditional media, you're going to be an instant fan of Rebelle. And if you're also a fan of artwork that doesn't look AI generated, because a lot of digital work these days is kind of gets a little bit lost in the feeling of looking like AI, because you know everything is so smooth and overly rendered and so on. It's really easy to do that kind of work digitally, but with Rebelle, it's really cool because you just get the brushstrokes, that you get that human touch, and I found that to be very important these days. I mean, as AI unfortunately takes some proportion of the digital artist jobs away, the ones that have remained for me have remained because I work in a way that looks like traditional work. And I do work in a traditional way, and the paintings and drawings I do are done with a traditional technique and a traditional background and a traditional approach. So that framework creates an outcome that it has, you know, there's still an appetite for that out in the commercial industry, where people are looking for artists who can create something that looks like it was made by a human being. And Rebelle obviously excels at that. But more than just its commercial relevance, I think the huge benefit of Rebelle is that it is a tool that that feels like it was made for. You can feel that it's referencing the human world, the way that it's made. You know, it's a tactile experience. It's the fluid simulations. As you can see here, I'm adding little dollops of watercolor to do what I do with charcoal. I often will drip water into my charcoal or use paint with my charcoal. And it's a fun way to sort of add even more of that human touch. And what's neat about it is the fluid simulation, the I guess surface simulation, the textural surface simulation is very, very accurate. So it does all the things like you would normally expect to happen when you drip water into your drawing. You know, it'll ruin it in the same way that it would if you did it on accident. It'll fix it in a way that if you did it on purpose. But here I'm also using the blending tool. Now, a blending tool is something that was really underused by me for a long, long time with Rebelle. But it works just like a tortillon or one of those little blending stumps that you can buy at the art stores, and it just works and feels the same way. It gives you a nice polished feeling. And you don't often see me, if you watch my tutorials, get into this level of polish because it's usually not so much my interest. But for a charcoal drawing, a final render, I think it's important to show you guys what's possible, because you've seen me work in a kind of raw, unfinished way. And now I think it's important you can see how to make a picture look like it has been almost burnished with the blending stump or smoothed out with the paintbrush. And the tools here, they afford you every bit of that control. And here I'm using like a white an eraser or a white tone charcoal. You can use it either one. You can either erase with the shape of the charcoal, or you can create an eraser that has the shape that you need, or you can just paint white like a white charcoal pencil or white charcoal chunk or a white pastel chalk on top of your black charcoal. So thinking of those digital and traditional analogs, they all kind of exist. A lot of what's happening here as I'm working on this is I'm trying to do a very important thing, which is I'm trying to create a finished, polished look without overworking it. Because when you overwork something, you kill it. It looks dead. It looks lifeless. It doesn't have that visual punch and the freshness of being made by a human hand. And so I'm really being careful to let my brush strokes still stand strong, and it's really this is a matter of taste, and this is where you and your practice as an artist get to make the judgments. And that's so much of the fun of being an artist, is once you accomplish some level of technical ability, then it's just the realm of your taste that takes over, and you can make things that feel and look like you want them to feel and look. And when it comes to that feel and look, this is that part of the painting where I feel like it's come a long way and it looks nice, but it doesn't yet feel like I want it to. And so I'm going to play with some of the more advanced features here. And I think the fluid simulation is pretty advanced. I mean, it's one of the just default tools. You can tinker with the watercolor brushes, and you can add water to any media that you want to. Between that and using the brush here as a blender, I'm sort of simulating the way that I work in traditional charcoal. I like to use a brush as a blender on top of my finished watercolor work, and I do like to distort and embellish with water. And so sometimes those distortions and embellishments, they work out, and sometimes they don't, and you can just work right over top of them, especially here in digital. So at this point in the drawing, I'm looking at creating little highlights right on the edge of the brow ridge, right on the ball of the nose, the ball of the chin, just that little line above the lips. Those little highlights really add that just oomph to the three-dimensionality of it. And if it ever comes in too strong, you put down a little highlight mark that's a little too strong, you can simply blend it down. You can blend it down with the charcoal set to blend. You can blend it down with the oil paints set to blend. Any tool in the entire software can be used as a blender, changing the tool to number 4. So each tool has a different setting, 4 or 5 different settings. You can use it just as a mark making tool, which is setting number 1, just 1 on the keyboard. Setting number 2 is the tool itself with a little bit of a blend function. So it'll make the mark, but it will interact with whatever is on the canvas. Setting 3 is sort of a half and half between blending and applying new pigment. And then setting 4, just 4 on the keyboard, is going to let you just use that particular brush with that particular texture as a blending tool. And then setting number 5 is going to let you do that same thing, but it's going to erase using that same texture and mark. So really, really cool, and pretty similar to the way that it works in real life, except that you have this kind of digital approximation, and it works amazingly well. As you can see here, I'm using a lot of blending. So the tool is set to blend mode, and I'm just kind of working over all of those little areas that stand out to me as not feeling right. And when I do this, it's that matter of taste. It's just trying to get it to look like I want it to look. You can get the drawing or the painting really close to finished pretty quickly, but you'll find that last 10% takes you half the time. And that can be everything from refining your edges and cleaning up what the periphery looks like, to adding these little brush strokes that show that the hair is kind of flowing and falling and looks a little more like hair. This is really a fun part of the work, and I just think I wish I could show you this without speeding it up, but I think it might lose some of you guys because it would be kind of just boring. But the thinking that goes into this part is really intense. There's a huge amount of just subtlety that goes into trying to make this part of the painting work. And I use the word painting and drawing interchangeably here. Notice also how I'm very zoomed out. I think one of the big mistakes is when we work is that we are too zoomed in most of the time. It's really nice if you can work on the drawing and the painting when you're looking at it from kind of far away. In traditional work, this would be you stepping away from the canvas. Typically in your studio or your workspace, you have a little room behind the canvas, and you would take a number of steps back to sort of squint at it from afar. So in summary, this has been an incredibly fun drawing, and I really think it came out exactly like I wanted it to, and I just am so happy that Rebelle can do this with this mix of wet and dry and brush strokes and water drops and blending and the roughness of the charcoal all coming together to make something that's really, really a good reflection of the way that I like things to look.